Welcome to SandStories, the platform created to take a closer look at the most overused and undervalued resource on Earth. We work to find solutions to the global sand crisis by building connections within science, policy, and industry. My name is Kiran Pereira, and I'm the founder of SandStories. In this episode, we speak to Frazer Stokes, the founder of WasteBuild, an organization that aims to eliminate global waste through innovations in the built environment. WasteBuild's mission is to accelerate the transition towards a circular built environment by showcasing the latest materials, techniques, solutions, and innovators who are helping to deliver circular schemes today. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, no, not a problem at all. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you so much, Frazer. Before we begin and plow right ahead with questions that I have for you, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about WasteBuild and why did you start it? It's such an exciting concept.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, so the background actually stems from my own experience in the event space. So I've run events and specifically construction, architectural design events for many, many years. And two things struck me when I was running these events. One, essentially how wasteful the act of organising and running an event is. I mean, 2, 3, 5 days, however long it may be, they're designed to be temporary. And so much is wasted at the end of that event, be it the carpet that's rolled out across these exhibition halls or whatever it may be. And I thought, well, there's got to be a better way of running an event. So I had in mind, I want to run a circular event. I want to run an event where we actually don't create waste. I want it to be a positive thing. And the other thing that became very apparent of working in events in the construction space is construction itself is an inherently wasteful process. Just through its inefficiencies, how it's developed over the years, so much material or so much of whatever it may be is ordered to site that actually never gets used. There may be nothing wrong with it, but it's either over orders or it's essentially broken when it arrives, or it's broken throughout the process. You think, well, again, there's got to be a better solution here. And so I just started thinking about this idea of, okay, how can the circular economy apply to me as an events organizer, but also the sector in which I operate? And actually, very, very quickly in the research, it became apparent that actually we're crying out for solutions here, particularly in the construction space. People want to find a better way of designing and building and using raw materials, but we just don't have the answers. And so very quickly that developed into this event and this community, which is called WasteBuild, which sort of reaches 30 countries around the world. Thousands of people have kind of subscribed to it now or have signed up for the event. And yeah, we've had our one launch event in Amsterdam last year, and now coronavirus is affecting things pretty dramatically. But yeah, it's been kind of evolving and developing since then, really.
So from your experience in the construction sector, what do you see as the biggest challenges the sector faces?
I suppose I kind of touched on it a minute ago. That it's got inherent inefficiencies in the whole process, which kind of caused partly because of the high demand that there is. So urbanization, as we're currently faced with, just requires such a huge volume of rapid building to be undertaken that the process is essentially just kind of as quick as we can, or as cheaply as we can. Let's build this thing, or whatever this thing is. Let's get it up and let's get it built. And you find that there's just not enough forethought, not enough time considered or dedicated to this idea of, okay, that we might have a new way of doing things here. These inherent behaviors that exist, and it's not just for construction, but these inherent behaviors that people are used to doing are hard to kind of shift and break, and it takes a long time. And these new ideas, this notion of waste in the construction industry hasn't really been an issue or hasn't really been considered until, I suppose, relatively recently. But construction is such a huge consumer of raw materials. 50% of raw materials go into construction. But it also creates something like 39% of all waste.
Wow.
And a similar amount of...
That's huge.
It's huge, right? It's huge volumes of waste, huge volumes of materials used in construction. But it's not really looked at as a real contributor, or isn't looked at enough as a contributor to climate change, to CO2 emissions. And when you think, well, actually, we are such a huge consumer of raw materials, and we do create such waste. Actually, if we can address that, we can actually also make a really, really big difference to carbon emissions. If the construction industry can refine its processes, we can make a big, big difference into our impact on the environment. And it comes back to its biggest challenge is, I suppose it's probably behaviours. We're used to doing it a certain way, but that is changing, and that's the positive thing. We're looking now at alternative solutions, and those solutions actually don't need to be as carbon intensive or as negatively impacting on the environment as we're kind of used to.
That's interesting. So I'm coming at it from the SandStories perspective. So sand is at the center of every conversation that I have. I was interested in knowing, would you say the construction industry is aware of this looming sand crisis? And would you explain whatever your answer is?
Yeah, I would say probably not, actually. I think if you're on a construction site, you're on a huge mega project, you're probably slightly more aware of the volume of sand that's going into the whole kind of process. But if you're one of the thousands, tens of thousands of small builders that exist in the UK and across the world, you don't appreciate the volume of sand, or really the volume of any raw material that's going into the whole kind of construction process. And it's like that argument about the meat on your plate. You just see it as a bit of meat. Like you see your brick that you're building, or your glass that you're using, or whatever it may be, as just the end product. But you don't appreciate actually what's had to happen to that to get it to your plate, as it were, or to get it to your building site. And yeah, for sure, there's no way that your average builder or your typical architect working on an extension or a small project has any idea of the volume of sand that's had to be extracted from rivers or wherever it may be to contribute to this brick. There's no way that it will even enter a normal a layperson's mindset that not all sand is sand. You see how there's millions of square miles of desert which that sand actually can't be used for various construction processes because it's not the right sand. And so, no, I think it's one of those messages that actually hasn't cut through. I think what you're doing and other conversations that are happening are helping to make people aware. But it comes back to, once again, this huge kind of consumer of raw materials that the construction industry is. The more we talk about that, and actually that's arguably one of the other ways of overcoming these challenges, is just talking about it as we're doing now. The more we talk about it, the more we talk about the circular economy, the more we talk about how intensively raw materials are used in the construction industry, the more people will be aware of it, and the more people will start to change their mindsets and start to think of alternative ways of alternative solutions, be they alternative materials, be they alternative designs, be they whatever it may be. But starting to talk about it will hopefully enable and encourage more people to be aware of the problem.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So a few years ago, the circular economy was just a fuzzy concept, right? But
sure.
You did an event last year, and it was chock-a-block with lots of people sharing wonderful examples of what's already happening in practice. So I wonder if you can share with us some positive examples of the circular economy in practice. And if they're related to sand, even better.
Yeah. Well, as you started there, the circular economy was just a fuzzy concept. I think that's part of our problem. Even now, it means different things to different people. For me, again, it's that the point is that we don't have all the answers yet, but we're kind of on this journey. It's what WasteBuild was trying to do and continues to try to do. It's about having the conversation. It's about saying that we haven't got all the answers, but what we do have is a series of solutions and ideas that arguably will make your next project more circular than your last. And that's this journey that we're on, right? Which is, I suppose, part of the exciting thing. We're kind of not there yet, but we're all pulling in the same direction. We're all trying to. And yes, some of those projects that inspired me and I suppose got me into this kind of awareness of it. You've got things like the Waste House in Brighton, which is a Duncan Baker Brown, the architect, UK architect, just designed and built this actual working house. It's actually a building for the University of Brighton, but it's made from 90% waste. And you think, wow, actually, okay, this is not going to be the way we build houses in future, but it's a concept that establishes, hey, there is a different way of doing it. That's a great project. If you can look that up online, that's really interesting. Waste House in Brighton. You've got De Kervel in Amsterdam, which is where our event was. Again, it's similar. They just took this essentially wasteland that was not good for anything, and they've turned it into this living lab, almost this community of circular enterprise, which is a really inspiring project. There's the ABN AMRO Circle Pavilion in Amsterdam again, which again made out of essentially all waste or reused material. And this, again, it's a similar scale. It's probably not going to be how we're going to be building, but it just sets this conversation going and says, hey, there are different ways of doing things. And that in turn has led to more projects and more projects of scale, which is where we start to get really excited. And WasteBuild's message is really about it's time for action now. These pilot projects are continuing to happen, and these kind of inspirational things are kind of there for us to see and go, hey, what have we learned from that, and how can we operate at scale, and what can we do now to put this in place? And that is something that we're really trying to showcase with our event this year. And there are projects like, excuse my pronunciation, the Dutch people, Schonschip, which is the same architect, Martijn Poel from Space and Matter, who did De Kervel, who's essentially taken that relatively smaller project, although it's still sizable, and scaled it up to this whole neighborhood level where they've got this series of floating houses. It's a common thing in the Netherlands, but they've got this whole neighborhood of floating houses, which is using all kinds of solutions, not just circular economy at its heart, but off-grid energy creation, for example. They've taken what's been done at De Kervel, this singular, smaller project, and scaled it up. Similarly, again, in the Netherlands, which is where a lot of the kind of exciting things have happened so far, there's a project called Super Local. And again, this is really exciting for a number of reasons, but essentially this old 70s tower block is being deconstructed in modules. And they're taking these individual module blocks down, craning it off the existing tower block and positioning it on site and building a whole new neighborhood out of this existing tower block infrastructure, which would have just been... it's a wonderful, wonderful project. It's called Super Local. It's in an area of the Netherlands called Parkstad Limburg, right down in the south. And it really kind of reuses the resource, the inherent value that's in this material, the tower block already, rather than it being demolished, which would have been entirely what happened, at best used for some kind of aggregate in a future project or a roadbed or something. Have actually retained the embodied carbon that was used in that scheme or used in that original building. They've retained it in its current state and building a whole new community out of it. And this is where I suppose also the connection to sand and the hopefully trying to limit the amount of sand extraction we go through. By being able to learn from these projects, and in this case, being able to retain the infrastructure, the concrete that was used in these projects in its current form, you're ensuring that actually you don't need to extract more sand to create these new communities. So you've got the inherent valuable resource, rather than downcycling that or rather than demolishing it altogether, we're actually retaining its value in its current form. And that again is directly about how we can limit our raw material extraction, how we can limit the raw materials that we use, and then ultimately kind of operate in some kind of equilibrium with the environment, rather than this complete overshoot of our raw material use. And that's where the circular economy comes in. What I'm seeing happen and seeing develop is this notion of design for disassembly. So this 70s tower block in the Parkstad Limburg was not designed for one day it to be taken apart again. So it's a difficult process. We're learning, or the guys on site are learning how to do it as they're operating. But actually, buildings like the ABN AMRO Circle Pavilion has been designed so that it can be taken apart again in however many years' time. So simple things like the nuts and bolts and the fixings are accessible. There's no or limited adhesives used that ultimately render the raw material useless at the end of its life, because they're chemical adhesives. They kind of bond the things together that then can't be debonded in time. But if you design in the first place with disassembly in mind, you're able to reuse that material much more easily. And that then leads you on to this notion of kind of harvest maps. And if you're a developer operating across whatever area you may operate, you may know that in 10 years' time, for example, 5 years' time, whatever it is, we're going to need a new unit or new building over here to serve this purpose. And actually, we've got a building over there nearby that's coming to the end of its life. We could deconstruct that building and then reconstruct it nearby for the new purpose. But it requires, in the first place, that notion of design or disassembly to be incorporated into the design process in the first place, which again just is about flexibility of design.
Do you think something like this is being taught in schools of architecture?
Well, certainly. We mentioned Duncan Baker-Brown earlier. He certainly in the UK is one of the leading
pioneers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And he also is a lecturer at the University of Brighton, which is why that project was done there. And so there is an amount of teaching being done on the subject, but it's certainly not core to the curriculum, as it were. Now, we've come across movements like Architects Declare and various other movements like this. There's a Architecture Schools Declare, and I forget the exact name of it, but it's a similar thing where it's about incorporating this into the syllabus for architecture students. And it essentially, similar to Architects Declare, commits to certain things. It's that similar kind of notion that it should be core to architectural education about where our materials coming from and how can we change our mindset when it comes to use of them.
Wonderful.
But it's not being done enough, certainly not yet.
Yeah, definitely. So that's why examples like this help.
Completely. And that's why these pilot projects, while they're not in their own guys scalable, and we're not turning around and saying, hey, we're going to build like this forever and ever. It's about this learning process. And so again, that Duncan Baker-Brown project, he built that with the University of Brighton students, so that this wasn't a thing that he did with his firms. It stood alone somewhere. It was actually part and parcel of their architectural education. And it's still there now. You can go and visit the.
Is it open to the public?
I believe you can book tickets to go and see it, and it opens periodically throughout the year on open days. But there are meetings held there. We've done a tour there in the past. Kind of another event that I worked on called Constructing a Circular City. We held it at the University of Brighton, and we used Duncan's building as a kind of a site. So you can go and see it, and it's worth looking at, but it's worth looking online as well. And there are a number of similar projects that exist, but these pilots are about making us think differently. And then we're now at the stage, hopefully, where we're starting to see some real projects at scale happen. And we mentioned a couple super local, but there's others. There's ones in Sweden that are coming online as well. And hopefully the UK has got some exciting things in the pipeline as well. Certainly from a net zero perspective, we're having to sort of think about this now. Again, that's the theme behind WasteBuild this year. It's time for action now, because 2030 is kind of the next, if you like, milestones that we need to hit on our journey to 2050. Those 2030 targets need to be thought about and actually actioned now. That's 10 years now. We've got to start making a real difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, what are your plans for WasteBuild then?
Yeah, well, really, really tough, an interesting year at the minute for all of us. Events and the planning of events has been really dramatically affected by COVID-19. We were always going to roll out streaming content with our event, because part of our mission, we sort of touched on it earlier, is to demonstrate and is to be a showcase of how an event can be circular. And part of that is working with our audience, our relevant communities, to access the content remotely rather than jumping on a plane and flying tens of thousands of miles to attend the event in person. There will always be an element of in-person attendance, because it does offer something that you can't always get through your computer screen. But we've always been keen to encourage that. And we're certainly rolling out that streaming and online content at the live event this year. So you'll be able to access it remotely, which is exciting. But part of that process as well is we've launched, or we're just about to launch, it's not actually in the market yet, something called WasteBuild 365. And we're enabling all of the content from our event last year to be accessible year round. So that's on our website. You can just get access to that content. But we're also releasing new content to start with monthly. And it's live, interactive, engaging content where we've got key speakers talking about real life projects, real life challenges, looking for partners to help them deliver these projects. And we're incorporating with that this online networking, kind of speed networking, matchmaking program at the end of these sessions. So they're really short and punchy, hour-long type sessions, but the whole purpose is to just keep the construction community engaged with this circular message. We're keen to be able to kind of continue to grow our own audience who are really still keen for these solutions. There's something like 22, 23 different countries have signed up to Architects Declare movements. There's over 1,000 in the UK signed up to this thing. We all want to find circular solutions, but we just don't know where to get the answers from. And that's kind of what hopefully WasteBuild's trying to do, trying to make that content accessible when and where our audience want. This was the other thing to mention about WasteBuild this year. Given coronavirus, the event was meant to happen in November. Mm-hmm. There's such a level of uncertainty at the moment, but we're in June at the moment, and in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, we're not even able to get secure information or definite dates on our event until early September. So we've taken the call that there's just too much uncertainty, and we're going to move our event into Q1 of next year, into March. And that's been really well received so far by our exhibitors and by the speakers and by the people that are already confirmed. So that's quite a big change. But the physical event will run. People are really itching to get back to that kind of face-to-face engagement. What we're finding with these kind of Zoom calls or Skype calls, they're really, really incredibly useful. But that physical interaction is something that I think people are craving. And we can't wait to get the event back up and running again in March next year.
That's so exciting. So tell me, who would find the most benefit from attending WasteBuild?
So it's really anyone involved in the construction industry at an international level. I say international level simply because actually the real exciting projects are happening all over. It's not probably your kind of small one-man band builders, but it's those architects, engineers, contractors, designers, developers, anyone who's involved with schemes on a slightly larger scale than just an extension, really. The whole premise behind what we're trying to do is kind of showcase excellence and then take it from there and then develop it and then grow it. So I mentioned earlier, we've not got all the answers, but if you're an architect, you're a designer who is aware of the need to actually probably start making changes to our processes and how we design, how we build, then WasteBuild is going to be absolutely the kind of core event that you should be going to, and certainly you should be aware of, particularly through the online activity. It's about making those incremental changes to your next project so that we're all kind of working towards this kind of reduction in raw material consumption, reduction in waste, and ultimately a more circular built environment.
That sounds so exciting. I'm so glad. So would you share with us what's the best way to find out more? And I know there are podcasts that you make available. Could you tell us more about stuff like that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So basically the podcast program and our YouTube channel, all of that we've created from the content from our event last year. So at the end of 2019 in December. So there's podcasts available, there's YouTube videos available that are condensed presentations from our speakers from last year. It's all available on the website, WasteBuild.com. Mentioned we're just about to relaunch and rebrand. That should be live at the end of June, but these things have a habit of sliding. When that happens, we're going to be releasing this new interactive online meeting content. Again, all available through WasteBuild.com. And you can sign up to find out more information, sign up to the newsletter, you can pre-register for the events. All of it's free to access the content and to sign up for the live events. So yeah, just through the website, wastebuild.com. And when you're on there, my details and our contact details will be on the page as well. If you've got any questions or you want to ask anything or reach out to me, do feel free. We really, really love to hear from people and involve conversations really in our content program, because it helps to influence how we're shaping what we're doing.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, Frazer. That's really been a wonderful conversation, very enlightening. Wonderful to hear so many positive examples, and wonderful to see you take the lead, to actually practice making an event circular, I'm sure, is a huge task in itself.
Yeah, well, you're very, very welcome. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if I would say I'm taking the lead, but it is. That's what I've realised. We're a bit of a community, and we're all kind of working towards the same goals. And actually, you inviting me on to do the podcast or to have this interview is a really wonderful example of that. We're all kind of working in the same direction. And it's about having that community who are all kind of working together. And I think as a community, we're all kind of moving towards this end goal. And hopefully, by initiatives like SandStories and like WasteBuild, we're able to accelerate that transition.
That's exciting. Wonderful. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Kim.
Good luck with launching the website.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye then.